Welcome to episode 14 of the GameCritics.com podcast. I'm Tim Spaeth. Let's get right to the introductions, starting with our visionary founder and leader, Chi Kong Liu. Hello, Chi.
Hey, Tim. How's it going?
It's going great. It's going great. Are you excited to be back recording another episode?
Yes, I am. I just filed my taxes, so I'm even more particularly excited.
Is that good news or bad news?
Good news. Good news. I'm getting a big return. Thankfully, I'm a homeowner, so it works out.
Fantastic. I'm a homeowner, not getting a big return.
Really?
Yeah. I am, however, getting a child on April 15th, so there is that.
Yep.
Not to steal the thunder from your introduction, but just wanted to throw that in there. Welcome, Chi. Up next, it's the very bearded Mike Bracken. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Tim. How's it going?
I didn't want to assume that you still have a beard. Is that accurate?
I have a goatee, yes. Yeah, I don't have the dreadlocks anymore, but I do still have a goatee. So so that's pretty exciting. Today's been a rough day, though. I've spent the day figuring out that things that are supposed to be plug and play are really not plug and play.
Hopefully no technology that will prevent you from participating in the podcast.
No, I'm good on that front. But I did have a little confession to make. I reinstalled Final Fantasy XI today.
Oh no!
Uh-oh.
Oh no! What could possibly have enticed you to do that?
I just needed a little World of Warcraft break, and I was feeling a little nostalgic, so it's back home to Vana'diel.
I think we might have to hold an intervention.
Seriously. Chi, will Game Critics fly us all down to Florida to help Mike?
I think we're going to have to.
Yeah, no question. Well, the person who would be flying the furthest is our third panelist, returning to the show at long last. It's the soulful sounds of Mr. David Stone. Hello, David.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
It's great to have you back. How have you been?
Oh, it's great to be back. It's been a busy, cold Canadian winter, and I was up until after midnight doing a string quartet arrangement of Beatles tunes for a wedding on about 2 hours' notice, but you do what you got to do.
You do what you do for love, and that's the most important thing.
All you need is love.
Very nice.
Sorry.
Very nice.
Sorry.
That's what we missed, and we're happy to have you back. So this week on the show, 3 burning questions. The answers to which will shape the future of the games industry. Who knew that we wielded such power? Later in the show, and I'll introduce these in the reverse order that we're going to talk about them. Later in the show, do game developers need to grow up? We'll debate it. And before that, will every game eventually have co-op? I'll tell you right now. If the answer is yes, you guys will probably need to find a new podcast host, because I'll have none of that. But the first question we're going to answer tonight is on live, the future of gaming. Now, I would be shocked, positively shocked, if anyone listening to this doesn't know what on live is by now. But maybe this is the week my mom or my wife decide to listen to the show. So for them, here's the deal with On Live. This was officially announced at the Games Developers Conference a few weeks ago. Essentially, On Live is video games on demand, if you had to sum it up in a few words. And with the service, the games you buy are stored on a server instead of on a hard drive or on a disk or on a cartridge. And when you play, all of the processing is done on that server. So what's sent to your PC or your television is theoretically low latency, high definition video, assuming, of course, that you have a good enough high-speed internet connection. So the idea here is that games would be sold directly over the service. There'd be no more consoles, no more physical media. Picture landfills the size of the Grand Canyon filled with Xboxes and PlayStations, dogs and cats living together. And we've heard all this before. I'm reminded of the Phantom, for one. But we do have some major publishers that are signed up to use, or at least to distribute their games via On Live. Publishers like Electronic Arts, Take-Two, Ubisoft, Epic, Atari. So we thought we'd ask what you, the listeners, think of On Live, and we got some great feedback. I'm going to read a quote here from the prolific poster Hargrada, and Hargrada writes, I quote, "I can see easily this becoming the standard for gaming in the future. Maybe not On Live in particular, but streaming games directly to your computer or console will probably become normal for gamers at some point in the world of tomorrow. Aren't PC gamers halfway there already? With Steam, you don't get a physical product, you just download the game to your hard disk. Isn't this just the next step on that ladder?" So that's Hargrada's point. Guys, what do we think?
I don't quite agree with him in this sense. I see the On Live platform more like a rental service, really, because just look at, there's on demand for movies right now, and at the same time I still I'll use it to watch some certain movies for convenience, but at the end of the day, if I really love the movie, I'm still going to buy it so I can have it in my library and have it on my shelf. So I don't quite, even no matter how, I totally dig the service. I'm a PC, I haven't done PC gaming in a long time because I couldn't keep up with the arms race of the video cards and all that, and I couldn't afford to keep up with the arms race. And it's certainly very intriguing to get that quality without having to only have to subscribe to a service and not have to worry about the upgrades. But really, I don't think it's going to I think it's going to be an option for gamers. I don't think it's going to replace the medium, though, as we know it. What do you guys think?
I'm with you, Chi. And at this stage, I'm not a tech head, so I don't understand the technical aspect of how this is going to work. All I know is that pretty much everything I've read has said that the internet in this country, and in America in particular, is not at a point yet where this is something everybody could use, because it would require a bit of a connection, which I'm assuming to be true. But my bigger issue is that I like the idea of On Live, of having a system that plays all these different games, kind of like a centralized system. I'm just not really sold on the on-demand type element of it, because that puts a lot of power in the hands of one company that's, and again, the game companies. Like, you can't share your games with a friend. Will you be able to play your games on your account at a friend's house without having to buy them again? There's just so much we don't know about this right now that it's an intriguing idea. I remember a few years ago, Apex, who makes the crappy DVDs, were talking about making a player that played PC games on your TV. I thought that was a great idea. This seems like the next level of that, but at the same time, I'm just not entirely sold on it. I like to own games. The idea of them sitting on a server somewhere and you paying for them and only being able to play them for as long as somebody deems them worthy of being on a server, it makes me nervous.
The point of On Live isn't necessarily just to be an on-demand service, but the fact that you can play a game like Crysis, which makes most computers weep, on your grandmother's Dell laptop. That was really the main issue, was to get rid of the GPU arms race, as Chi was mentioning. The idea is that it doesn't matter how lowly it is. I've got a Mac Mini functioning as a media center PC in my living room. Hypothetically speaking, all I have to do is put a little Windows partition on there, let OnLive run, and all of a sudden I'm playing, high definition games on a PC on my giant TV screen on like a little crappy Mac Mini. Now for me, that's actually very appealing, because I'm not a PC gamer at all. In fact, I can't even think of the last time I even played a game on PC. I don't see this replacing the console, simply because I don't see any of the big three wanting to have their stuff centralized like that. But as far as PC, I think it can be an alternative. But I think it's more for people like me who maybe aren't PC gamers, particularly because we don't have giant rigs.
Right, but how many people, like your average, mom and pop grandmas out there, are asking that same question, though? Like, do they really?
It's not them, Chi. Think of a college student. Think of somebody who's got a really crappy laptop but want to play, great games with the high textures and all the anti-aliasing and all the other polysyllabic things that the games do.
Right, but we're not. So we're not saying. So this isn't the mainstreaming of PC gaming then either, right?
Well, anybody who would have the bandwidth to be able to support something like that certainly wouldn't be under the mainstream. You know, Grandma doesn't have her files connection.
If we're buying the games directly through the online service, we are eliminating the brick and mortar retailer. We're eliminating GameStop as an example. Theoretically, you could have a lower priced product as a result. So if Grand Theft Auto 5 came out via OnLive for $40 through that system, or you could go into the store and buy it for $60, to me, that's a pretty compelling case to use OnLive.
But I don't believe for a second that would actually happen, especially in light of this week of every developer whining and Reggie from Nintendo saying that a game had to sell 1 million copies on the Wii to make a profit, and what, they had 18 that have done that out of all the games on the Wii. I think these guys are just, at this point, looking for excuses to charge us more than $60 for a game.
Yeah, I agree, Mike, because if you look at like any on-demand service today, you rarely see that discount, or like on Steam, right? We talked about this last time, right? You would expect to see a discount on Steam, but it ain't there.
Yeah, it's just a case of, in theory, that's a nice selling point, but I just don't see game companies in the actual execution saying, well, we're going to cut out packaging and everything and pass that savings on to you, the consumer. I guess I'm just a little cynical that way.
And, I'm not even sure the way they position it is like you're actually buying the title, because, you run into like tricky areas of licensing, and, is there a time limit on the license, and, is it a rental?
Yeah.
Or you...
You know what it kind of reminds me of when you say that? It reminds me of, remember when DVD was new and DivX was the competitor, and you'd buy a DivX discs and you had to pay like $3.99 and you could watch that movie as many times as you wanted in 48 hours. Then later, if you wanted to watch it again, you had to pay $3.99 again. It's sometimes I kind of get that vibe from it. But again, I don't know the details. I don't know that any of us know all the details about what they're planning with this. I will say that the idea of it for PC gaming intrigues me, because for whatever reason, I still buy physical copies of PC games, but I'm not like anti playing things on through a download through Steam or something like that. I'll end up going out and buying it physically if I really like it. And to be out of the arms race to keep upgrading your video card and your processors and all this stuff would be pretty cool, because, if you buy a gaming rig now, 2 years later, you're going to have to shell out a couple grand again for another one if you want to play the bleeding edge stuff. I just don't know that I care for it so much for console gaming.
All right. But assuming it does what it says it's going to do and it comes out at a reasonable price, so, are you going to sign up, Mike?
Yeah, I would be willing to check it out. I think it's a really interesting idea, especially, like I said, for PC games, because PC games have become sort of this niche thing, because to be into PC games, you have to lay out such a huge amount of cash on a system that it's prohibitive. It doesn't let a lot of people get into PC gaming. So anything that brings, the experience of playing Crysis or World of Warcraft or other MMOs or some of these other big PC titles to more people, I'm all for. I'm just not entirely convinced that the technology is going to allow them to pull it off, and I don't know enough details about how the ownership of the games is going to work.
Right. What about you, Dave?
Well, I'd be really intrigued about it to try a lot of these PC games that, quite frankly, I've just never played. It's not for lack of interest; it's for lack of rig. So the idea that I could actually potentially play it, and you see, I don't think I'll particularly care, even if there's, 20 to 30 milliseconds of latency of any kind of lag. I think I'd be okay with that, knowing that I just saved myself $2,000 on a rig.
You know what's really funny about it to me is listening to these answers and thinking about it and seeing all the reaction on the internet is that we gamers are the pickiest bastards in the world, because for years all I've heard everyone say is, God damn, I wish there was just one console that played every game, that all games were on one console so I could just have one machine that played them all and I would be happy. I wouldn't have to spend thousands of dollars on a PC and multiple consoles. And here's someone who wants to give us something like that, and all any of us can do is bitch about it. So it's just, we're just never happy gamers.
Well, we had a few other comments on the message boards. I'll just run through a couple of these, although I think we've covered all of the major points. Our newest game critic, and we want to give him a shout-out, Richard, he actually posted, he said, quote, I think services such as Steam will become the standard before something like OnLive will. I wouldn't want my ability to play my game to be dependent on my internet connection, assuming it wasn't an online game of some sort. And, reading that, it occurs to me, Mike, you and I are already doing this with World of Warcraft. I mean, that's essentially what World of Warcraft is this service. So we're just expanding it to other types of games. We also had a comment from Bruno, who says he says, quote, I think physical distribution will not die. It will just become an alternative and possibly more expensive channel aimed specifically at collectors. So they're out to screw you, Mike, is basically what Bruno is saying here.
That's the story of my friggin' life.
There you go. So I guess the ultimate answer with OnLive is we'll wait and see. And certainly I'm hopeful all the technical issues will be worked out, and I do hope it goes live so that we, the gamers, can at least make an informed decision about whether this is something we actually want or not. So we didn't get to read all the comments, but I do want to thank Hargrada, Bruno, Mr. Lefty, and Sleepy, who all made comments, and we thank them for those comments. Let's move on. Should we move on? That's our first question. I said we had 3 questions. That's number 1. Let me introduce number 2. Are you ready? Are you all holding on to something?
I'm locked.
Yes, I am.
Good. All right. I don't want to know what you're holding on to, but here we go. Resident Evil 5, which, by the way, if you haven't heard, is the sequel to Resident Evil 4. Yeah.
It's amazing how they do that.
Yeah.
I gotta take notes. I
am going to drive that joke deeper and deeper into the ground every week. I can't stop doing it. Here's the deal. Resident Evil 5. I really, really want to play it. Loved Resident Evil 4. Part 5 looks fantastic. Here's the problem. Everything I've read about it says you've got to play it with someone else. You've got to play it co-op. And my knee-jerk reaction to that was just to be completely turned off by the entire concept. I was angry. I was resentful. But I didn't really understand why. So I spent the last week or so in deep contemplation trying to figure out why this angers me so much. And I think I figured it out. I spend all day at work managing a team of people. I come home from work. I manage my children. By the time I'm finally alone, the last thing I want is any modicum of responsibility over another human being, whether that person is real or virtual. I just don't want any part of it. I want to be alone. And the thought of babysitting a partner through a game completely turns me off. So that's where I'm coming from. But am I being rational, I guess, is the question I have for you. So let's start this by focusing on Resident Evil 5 specifically. Am I right to be annoyed by this? I mean, is Resident Evil 5 just unplayable without a human partner?
No, I spent a fair amount of time playing the single player as well as with co-op and the exact same missions as well, because my friend needed to catch up to me, so I ended up just sort of playing it, twice over again. And I gotta say, it's I'm gonna take the non-popular, game critic opinion right now and say I think it's fine both ways. There's pros and cons, and I don't believe that it's a must that you have to play it co-op to get the full experience. And I'll tell you an example of what I mean. Well, first of all, I give credit to the AI. I mean, whether you're playing with somebody or not, the computer does step in as the co-op buddy, as what's her name? Sheva, the character, the character, the partner in Resident Evil 5. And to Capcom's credit, the AI is pretty decent on the partner, and she does some things really well. Like whenever you're hurt, if she has the healing herbs on her, she'll quickly heal you up much better than your partner ever would. It's a bit of a challenge there.
I gotta jump in there. You really think her AI is good?
It's adequate to me. I mean, I didn't have any problems with it. I mean, she shoots pretty damn straight. She shoots straighter than me, actually. So
I have played, not as much as you, admittedly, but I have played some of the game with single player mode, and I don't have a problem playing in single player mode. But if I get one scratch on me, she'll heal me with the giant herb. She'll blow through every bit of ammo she picks up. It's just, sometimes she's just so moronic, I want to shoot her myself. So that's my frustration with playing single player with it. You can do it, but I just think her AI is terrible.
And that's what I don't want any part of, is I don't want her screwing up my game. And, I compare it to Gears of War, specifically Gears of War 2, which I know is a fantastic game co-op, but if you play it single player, your partner, whether it's Dom or the other guys, they're completely self-sufficient. You don't have to heal them. You don't have to provide them with ammo. They rarely die. They don't get in your way. They're just hanging out, spewing off snappy one-liners. But if I'm playing Resident Evil 5, do I have to worry about Shiva's health? Do I have to provide her with ammo? Do I have to babysit her?
Yes.
Go ahead, David.
But I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, simply because Resident Evil is about survival. And I don't want to go off on too big a tangent just yet about it, but Resident Evil has a history with the focus being on survival rather than being a horror. It's more about survival than it is about horror. And so all this is sort of the next evolutionary step of that.
How far have you...
But sorry, let me go back to that for a second. To the actual quality of the AI. I mean, Dave, but she's. I mean, do you agree with Mike? First of all, do you think that her AI is horrible overall?
Well, this is where I can't really talk about it because I actually haven't played the game in any other mode other than with my wife.
Okay, so you know what? I'll just. Fair enough.
And I see that as a great thing because we only have one big rig to play games on in the house. Right. And I have to tell you, it's really cool to be able to have this AAA game that she and I can play almost independently at times because of the way that the split screen is set up. I think it's beautifully designed. I think it's beautifully implemented. The fact that we can be in different parts of a complex at the same time without the magic warp necessarily happening, I see that as nothing but a great thing.
And like I said, as someone who's played it both ways, I think the AI is pretty decent. Mike, to address your concern about the overbearing healing, more often than not, she'll go nuts on you. But more, I'm in trouble whenever it's usually happening, so I appreciate it. And so it's okay. I totally hear what you're saying. It's just not that bad. I thought it was pretty decent.
Well, here's the thing about it is like I often feel like with her, it's not even so much that she's stupid. It's that I have to micromanage her entirely too much. Like I have to pay attention to what I let her pick up or what I give her. Like I find myself spending a lot of time taking things away from her so she can't use them stupidly. It's like having a small child, and my daughter's going to be 16 in 2 weeks, so I don't have any small children anymore, and I guess it's a good thing that I don't, because I don't want to babysit her.
I gotta say, my experience has been completely the opposite, Mike. So, I don't know. I guess, Tim, you're gonna have to play it to find out. But I find that she's very reasonable in her autonomy. She'll occasionally break a barrel, but more often than not, she won't. She'll wait for me. When there's an item there, I'm usually telling her what to do with it, and she does it. So I'm pretty happy with it. Going back to comparing it with the co-op mode, for a bit. There's a portion of the game, and I don't want to spoil it too much, I guess, but there's an on rails type of shooter portion that when I played with the AI, I just breezed through it. I thought it was great. It was fun. It was the kind of, it's the kind of stage where it's just sort of I don't know what's the word, but just sort of a crowd pleaser type stage, right? Just sort of meant to be kind of easy, yet at the same time, still exciting and fun. And with the computer AI, I blew through it like I thought I would, and I enjoyed it. When I played it with my co-op buddy, we actually struggled the hell out to finish that stage for whatever reason. It was just a completely different experience at that point. And again, here's a part where I actually, appreciated the co-op doing a better job than my buddy did in the case of that. And it kind of goes back and forth in certain areas where, my buddy will do a better job in certain cases, but the AI will often do a better job in others. So for me, it was a toss-up. I was cool either way.
Well, you guys have been absolutely no help to me whatsoever. But let me ask you, and this is just a quick aside. This isn't the first time Resident Evil has been on, had the ability to do online co-op, is it? David, you're something of an RE expert, aren't you? Am I?
Well, I'm something of a guy who's played a whole whack of it. There were the games on the PlayStation 2. I'm blanking on the name, of course, at the moment, but they were the online 4-player Resident Evil titles. They were 2 case files that were ever done.
Outbreak.
Thank you. Yeah, Resident Evil Outbreak, and there was the second case file as well. Unfortunately, the servers for both of those broke down, but Resident Evil has definitely had this wonderful history of trying to survive a group, because if it's just you against a series of zombies, unless you're actually not even in Dead Rising, Frank still had the help of the crowd. You're never ever by yourself. From every single Resident Evil title, they've never ever been by themselves. From RE1 with Bravo Team, even though you were kind of on your own, you were never in the house by yourself.
Well, I don't want to be by myself. I just want someone that I don't have to continually take things away from because she's going to waste precious resources, basically.
If you ever played with an experienced gamer, though, that's exactly what ends up happening. If you've ever played, like when I used to play Outbreak all the time, and you'd always know who was brand new on the server because they would just blow through their ammo thinking there'll be plenty more of it. And then they go, oops, that's not going to work, and then they end up playing the zombie actually pretty darn quick.
How did
it has to be your definition of survival? And I think that's the one thing that people seem to forget is they look at it as a mechanic of the game, but not something as part of the genre of game, and not something as part of the DNA of games in general. Because in the past, going back to the original Nintendo, or even Pong, for instance. The idea of local, granted, I'm usually playing local multiplayer because thankfully my wife lives with me, not in another continent. But it's something that's really important, I think, to the DNA of gaming in general.
So and that's a good transition. Let's take the opportunity to expand this beyond just Resident Evil. One thing I'm noticing in a lot of reviews of major titles is that if co-op play is missing, they're docking it in the review. It's almost become an expected component. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's just a thing. I think it has to be. I think it's a bit of the flavor du jour. But look at a game like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. When it was out in the arcade, it was 4 players. When it was only able to be 2, it was lambasted.
Or 2 humans, similarly.
Yeah, if you remember a few years ago, it was they were docking everything if it didn't have an online component. Now we've switched to co-op, so I'm not don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-co-op or anything like that. I play World of Warcraft, which is like a hugely co-op experience. You go into dungeons now with 25 people. We used to go with 40 people. You have to play with other people and coordinate to do things. But I sometimes feel like the focus on co-op now, like where it used to be online gaming, it takes away from the single player experience, and I tend to enjoy my single player experiences because I don't want to deal with other people. When I want to deal with other people, there are specific games designed to let me interact with other people, but sometimes I just want to play a single player game, and it just feels like it's getting harder to do lately. Because even if the game is single player, like in RE5's case, it's maybe a little different experience if you play with someone else. So I'm a little frustrated with it.
But one could make the same argument from previous year's games, like take Contra, for example. That was a game that was perfectly playable on your own. And, it was very difficult, but you could do it. But there was nothing better than on a Saturday morning, with your buddy and you're still in your PJs or something, going down to the rec room in the basement and, blowing away some Red Falcon together.
See, dude, I like to play Contra by myself. I am like the J.D. Salinger of video games, apparently. I am like a total recluse because I just interacting with other people. Jean-Paul Sartre said, hell is other people, and that's like my mantra, so I guess I'm just the wrong audience.
And I think I'm the perfect audience because I remember the generation when the N64 came out, how totally stoked we all were that, oh my god, 4 of us are going to play together, and there were organized Smash Brothers parties and GoldenEye parties and even Mario Party parties just because it was possible to do that. And now it's something we almost take for granted. And even, as you guys say, sometimes it's even seen as a negative.
Yeah, I grew up on Double Dragon, so, I love co-op. It's sort of one of the main trademarks of gaming that got me into it as well. And overall, I think it's, I think the trend is a good thing. I don't want it shoehorned and hijacking, single player experiences. But when you're talking about something like RE5 where, they're trying to create, a 2-player dynamic and games like Kane and Lynch, Army of Two, even Gears of War, I think, it's a good thing, and I'd like to see more of it and, nurturing and companionship. I think these are all, good things we should explore.
Well, I think Gears gets it right, too. Gears is a fine experience co-op, and it's a great experience single player. So I'm all in favor of it if they could emulate something like that, where you can play the single player and still get the full experience as you get into co-op. So I sometimes feel like now the pendulum is swinging to focusing more on creating a better co-op experience at the expense of single player, which is how I feel about RE5. So,
my greatest fear, and I wake up in a cold sweat every night, is that in Half-Life Episode 3, Alex Vance will be playable. And then you can play Gordon Freeman and Alex, and that just, it terrifies me. And I'm weeping right now, in fact, just thinking about it. So, what conclusion have we reached about co-op?
I think as long as co-op is done right, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It sounds like, Mike, we just hate people in general.
Yeah, I think you know what it is, Tim? Is we've played a lot of World of Warcraft, so we've seen the ugliest humanity has to offer. So if you spend a lot of time playing MMORPGs, you start to hate the world because you see idiots day in and day out. And so the last thing you want to do when you want to have fun is play with other people.
They should put that in the back of the box.
Yep.
Idiots day in, day out. The worst of humanity.
Well, with that, can't end any better than that. Let's take a break. When we come back, is the industry stuck in a state of arrested development? We'll talk about it after this. 4 our final topic this week, we go back to the Game Developers Conference and a talk delivered by games journalist Heather Chaplin. And she brings some fairly impressive credentials to the table. She's covered games for nearly a decade for various mainstream outlets, NPR among others. She's also the co-author of a book about the industry called Smart Bomb, which was very well reviewed. Anyway, her talk at the conference, she actually addressed a room of game developers directly, and envision a room of about 99% men. And she called them a bunch of stunted adolescents. That's a direct quote. And really the premise of her talk was that game designers are mired too deeply in what she called guy culture and that developers avoid dealing with anything resembling responsibility, introspection, intimacy, intellectual discovery. And to help make her argument, she compared the industry to film and music. And she says that at the same age of their medium, movies had Fritz Lang and were on the verge of Citizen Kane. Rock and roll had Bob Dylan and the Beatles. So I don't necessarily disagree with Chaplin's core argument, and we will get to that, that the top games are just male power fantasies. But I do have serious problems with the way she's making the argument, specifically those comparisons to music and film. Now, tonight on our show, we have a musician who is also a music expert, and we have, of course, the horror geek himself, a film expert. So I leave it to you, gentlemen, to first deconstruct that part of her argument, the film and music comparisons. And then we'll get to the larger issue of stagnation and maturity in the industry, which I do think have some merit. So, David, Mike, I will leave it to you to choose who will unleash their fury first.
Well, I've been pretty quiet so far, so I think it's time that I shut my mouth off just a little bit.
Unleash the beast.
All right. Well, let me also just say, for the audience's sake, for those who may not know my history, I know Mike is very well known in the film circuit, but my music may not necessarily be quite as well known. But I've been studying music for over 25 years. I've got a degree, and it's my degree, it's my job, it's my life. As you probably heard at the beginning of the podcast, like I said, I was just doing a string quartet arrangement on a Friday night. So, just to lend a little bit of credibility to what I'm about to spew here, she says that rock and roll had Bob Dylan and the Beatles. Well, music didn't exactly have rock and roll. If we were to take Western European music history, because in our North American culture, that's really the root of most of what we listen to, as starting at around, I'm arbitrarily saying 1300, although that's complete. I'm going to have a bunch of musicians, yelling at me saying it started earlier, etc. I know, but let's just take that as a starting date. The Beatles arrived in the 1960s, so we had over 650 years for the medium to evolve before something like the Beatles could even be expressed in the first place. You also have, looking back through history, monolithic composers. Guys like Beethoven, who are sort of like literally the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey, who single-handedly changed the entire direction and future of the medium. Now, it's completely unfair to, make any kind of comparison between these game changers and everything else that was going on around them. And we, thankfully, with music history, have the hindsight of hundreds of years of well-documented progress. There's a reason why, when you think of the classical period, you think of guys like Mozart, and you think of guys like Haydn. But who else do you think of? Does that mean that in all of Western Europe there were only two composers doing something? Of course not. That would be ludicrous. So to say that rock and roll had Bob Dylan and the Beatles, absolutely. It also had how many other hundreds and hundreds of performers and writers and artists who were working at the time who, of course, history is going to forget. So I think to be able to, now just moving forward with our games analogy, in the same way that I'm arbitrarily saying that music history began in 1300, I'd say our modern video game history realistically begins in 1984 with the release of the original NES after the Atari game market crash. No offense to the Vectrex or Magnavox Odyssey or the guys still playing Smurfs on their ColecoVision.
So hang on, let me jump in for a second there. Sure. I actually had a question. So when you say the point I think you're getting at is when you're saying like in the 60s we had the Beatles and Dylan, but we had all these other guys. We had all those other guys who maybe weren't doing the level of work of the Beatles and Dylan, and they were still part of rock and roll, right?
I don't disagree with that, but the problem is you're starting to paint the medium with entirely too broad a brushstroke, which is actually sort of where I was just going with that. So I'm actually grateful you're almost backing my next point, which is that if gaming is realistically only 25 years old, from 1984 to 2009, we've got a long time to go for this medium to evolve. Because the one thing that our medium has that no other one has along with it is the fact that it follows the same track as technology, which is arguably one of the fastest evolving products that mankind has ever produced.
So the 3D experience as presented in Super Mario 64 13 years ago, revolutionary at the time, archaic 13 years later. That is, particularly if you put it up against, say, Super Mario Galaxy. So that is something intrinsic, something unique to games that is not the case in music or film. So, Mike, on the film side, would your argument be in line with what Dave is saying about music?
It is to a large degree. It's the interesting thing is the thing I don't get anymore that I used to, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone was comparing games to film. Games and film, why are we so hung up on comparing these two things anymore? They're only alike in the most rudimentary way, and that they usually try to tell a story, and it's a fairly visual medium. But when you get right down to it, as much as I love film has a lot easier time, doing what it does because all it's doing is telling a story to a passive audience who's experiencing it. Games have to not only tell a story to a passive audience, but they also have to keep players involved through contextual actions, interacting with it. So that's a way, way harder thing to pull off. And for all her complaints, film has auteur theory, which basically, certain filmmakers have elevated themselves to a level of deification, basically. Right now, we're at the same point with games. While there are a majority of guys making games who are making games that are adolescent fantasies, we've got Miyamoto, who qualifies certainly as an auteur of game development. We've got, whether you like Peter Molyneux or not, Fable. He's certainly made games that have shaken our perception of what games are supposed to be. We've had guys. There were other guys at GDC who would be considered huge luminaries in the field of game development. I understand that you're talking about the rank and file developers, and there are certainly guys out there who are making juvenile games. But at the same time that Fritz Lang was making Metropolis, there were guys making crappy movies too, and it didn't ruin film. So it's a harsh sentiment, and it's not entirely fair, but it makes a great soundbite, I think. So kudos to her for saying something in such a way that we're still talking about it a week and a half later. But I think when you really get down to it, the film to game comparison doesn't really work. It's sort of lazy criticism. The easiest way to be a critic is to compare things, and instead of taking them on their own. And comparing games to film has been one of the problems, and I've been as guilty as anyone of it, to try to critique gaming so that other people can understand it, instead of just talking about what makes games wonderful in their own right.
So I think we can all agree that the way she's making her argument, we don't agree with that. But the core of her argument, that we are stuck with male developers making male-centric games that are immature and not evolving. Clearly, Mike, as you just pointed out, games that break that mold are out there. But these are not the games selling Grand Theft Auto numbers. These are not the games selling Halo numbers. And these are not the games getting all of the press.
But Takeshi Kitano films are not making the same amount of money as Transformers either. So it's, it still ties together. I mean, you've got a guy, Wong Kar-wai's movies, 100,000 people see them, but at the same time, Michael Bay makes a crappy movie about fighting robots, and that's huge. It's kind of a weird a way to tie those things together.
But the thing is, now there's a bit of a startup in our industry that's actually changing the face of that ideal in a very big way, which I'm very, very shocked that Ms. Chaplin completely ignored. And that's the casual game. Games like Bejeweled, or the Mania series like Cake Mania, Nanny Mania, whatever, or the Dash series like Diner Dash, are raking in huge, huge business. And in fact, I believe, from what I remember reading, they're talking that the numbers from the casual industry are going to either rival or eclipse that of the quote-unquote hardcore industry, if they haven't already, sometime in the next 2 years.
Right.
And what's really impressive about that is those games are a lot cheaper than $60 games. So.
Right, but I don't think she's. It's a fair enough point, but I don't think she was making the comparison from a financial standpoint. I think it was more from a creative experience standpoint of the kinds of things the kind of emotions and range of experiences that you get from films and music that we're not seeing. Although casual games is one form of an experience as well, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely, Chi. Think about, I hate to, and I'm loath to say this, and feel free to fire me from future podcasts for this, but Britney Spears. I mean, you want to talk about something that's devoid of emotion and devoid of almost anything meaningful, but hot damn, she's earned more money than all of us will ever see in our entire lives combined. So I understand what you're saying about ignore the financial aspect, but you really can't in this day and age. I think that it's just something we can't ignore because, as much as we all hate it, our art forms have all been monetized in some way now. And at the Game Developers Conference, these are games that are being developed. And trust me, I've seen these casual gaming sites. Those gamers are as vocal and hardcore about their games of choice than we are.
This is Heather Chaplin's problem, is that because she's stuck in an industry, or rather in game journalism, that's what they're all about, is they're covering those monetization booms, as you said, and she can't, afford, her bank account can't afford her to talk about other games that are interesting, really.
So let's take some games we've been playing recently. If you each took a game, take the last game that you've been spending the most amount of time with. For example, the game I'll take is Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, which I have to be honest is exactly what Heather Chaplin is describing. I think that game is, I called it a masterpiece when I first discussed it on Twitter. It is a technical masterpiece, but from a story perspective, it is exactly as immature as every other Grand Theft Auto game that you've played. Particularly this one, there are exactly 2 women in the entire game. One of them, and this is not really a spoiler because it happens in the first 5 minutes of the game, one of them dies immediately, and the other one is an escapee from a mental hospital, and then she dies. And neither of them are important to the plot whatsoever. But the entire game is dudes talking to other dudes, talking about killing, talking about drugs, talking about genitalia. To play that game, it's difficult to say that she's wrong. What have you guys been playing that either prove or disprove what she's saying?
So I'm playing Mad World from Pseudo51, who brought us Killer 7, and this is a game that's being hailed as avant-garde and very bold and daring. And the funny thing about this game, and if anyone who's played it, it's extremely violent. I mean, this is hyper violent. Is not an adequate adjective to describe the amount of violence in this game. The whole point of the game is in this sort of game show atmosphere, and you're trying to find new and creative ways to pummel, impale, and torture your opponents in the most creative way possible in order to score bigger points and bigger ratings for the enjoyment of the gamer and the audience, I guess. And this sort of, it was funny how the violence took me back to like when I was in high school, and when I was in high school, I used to draw these sort of like little funny comics on loose leaf paper, and I would make them extremely gory, exploding heads, blood everywhere, and I always thought, I was being, gritty and very mature and all that, and that's sort of like my high school vision of what that was, and that's the impression I get of Mad World, but that's okay, because again, this is a 25-year-old medium, and I'm using the excuse that Heather Chaplin doesn't want me to use, but that's the way I see it. I think it's if the sequel to Mad World, or not the sequel rather, but the follow-up to Mad World, or they keep making more Mad Worlds that are identical to Mad World, then yeah, I would really start to emphasize that Heather Chapman has a really strong point there. You know, I think I give Pseudo51 here a sort of a pass on this one game, but for the time being. But he needs to keep evolving and growing, just as I did from when I was in high school on. So that's sort of my take on it.
You hit the nail on the head when you started talking about thinking what mature was, and video games are still definitely in that state of being teenagers who think mature means boobs and blood and gore and hasn't reached their 30s yet, where they start thinking about what real maturity is about. But at the same time, I mean, I think half of her complaint at the time, as I read it, was that she was tired of having to explain to people outside of gaming, why these things were important. And I don't know, I guess sometimes I'm just so geeky and insular that I don't feel the need to explain to people who don't get gaming why they should look at gaming or appreciate it. For the same reason, I don't need someone to explain to me why romantic comedies are worth getting or not. They're just not for me, and there's some people that games just aren't going to be for them. So I don't think that's a fault of the medium, though.
What's interesting also is that, because she's, as she said, that she's been covering the industry for the last 10 years. If she was really having a hard time explaining what was so important about these games to the mainstream, she should have looked beyond those 10 years, actually, and looked to the early 80s and early 90s of PC gaming, actually, and even maybe some of the Nintendo stuff as well. But, I think, mature games come from mature people, right? And my biggest issue with what she was saying is I'm not going to tell anyone how to live their life, right? If Cliff Bleszinski wants to be, nothing but the party dude or whatever, and I think he actually is trying to drop that image of his, and maybe that will result in more mature games, and that's fine.
Sorry, and I think she's missing the whole point of Gears of War. I mean, my game that I was going to bring to the table was Gears of War 2, and the fact of the matter is, the high school music, the high school musical level of, plot development and dialogue between these guys it's pretty asinine. And, if we were to distill the game down, yes, it's about big guys with big muscles and small penises running around blowing everything they can up. But you know what? That's okay. Because the game doesn't pretend to be anything else other than that. And it's about how gorgeous, the Unreal Engine 3 is able to be. And certainly for me, how wonderful the cover mechanic is. I love it. I think it's really fun. I think it's a very worthwhile experience. And that's okay for it to just be an experience.
All right.
And what it really comes down to at the end of the day is something we kind of hit at earlier, is that you could be her and make this complaint about most games being juvenile and popular entertainment with no depth. You could be Roger Ebert and make the same point about most movies being popular entertainment and lacking depth. And you could be Lester Bangs talking about music and make the exact same point. The point is that there's always going to be a lowest common denominator, popular movement in any of these art forms, and anything of real value and weight and philosophy and things like that. That's always going to be, there's going to be way less of that because it just doesn't appeal to everybody. And, I'm glad that we just at least have guys who are making games, even if there are only a few, that exist on a different level than the mainstream stuff that EA and Rockstar put out every year.
As part of her argument, why instead of telling these guys to grow up, because again, I don't agree with that tack, but why didn't she tell them to aspire to the Icos, to the Shadow of the Colossus, or like what I was trying to say earlier was that, games, even back to the original Leisure Suit Larry during the EGA days, right? We're talking 16 colors for people who don't know what EGA stands for. Mm-hmm. Here was a game that was about trying to get sex, and if and his first sexual experience was with a prostitute, and if you didn't put on a condom, you died. Now, how much more real can you get right there, right?
That was a social commentary on the AIDS epidemic that was sweeping North America at the time. Now we're in a time of war. We're in a time of desensitization.
Well, I think Al Lowe, if being quite honest, you were saying be careful when you have sex with prostitutes, but
Yeah.
You can go either way, though.
I was trying to actually elevate Leisure Suit Larry into some semblance of an art form. Thanks for chopping the legs off of that one.
David's ready to write film criticism right now because he found a way to take an exploitation game and make it into a parable about AIDS in the 80s. That's classic.
And this was with 16 colors, on the Tandies and on the, the early IBMs. So, I think those experiences are partly out there. And yeah, the trend now is, has gone away from a lot of more experimental gameplay that we saw in that era, and that's a shame. But at the same time, she didn't do herself any favors by not talking about the game developers that you mentioned, along with, I would add to that list, like Sid Meier, Warren Spector, the Roberta Williams, on and on, Al Lowell.
Yeah. There are literally, there are quite a few guys when you get right down to it who are fantastic game developers, who fit the mold of film auteurs in this medium. And I don't know, I mean, it's easy to say, well, everybody's in arrested adolescence and makes crap, but I don't know, it just makes it seem like she doesn't really like the medium she works in very well. Like I've said, I think her point that, there are a lot of crap games that are male power fantasies out there is totally valid. I just, think she could have said it in a way that would have been conducive to discussing why this is without being quite so confrontational and incendiary in the process.
I mean, I certainly don't play video games for that reason. And one of the reasons I do play video games is because it does offer a variety of experiences beyond my normal realm. And do I think that there should be more variety? Absolutely, unquestionably. But at the same time, I wouldn't have said it the same way, and would have liked to have seen more a broader perspective and maybe a little more gaming history brought to the table with that argument.
And the most unfortunate thing about this is that she said it in this way that caused all this uproar, and what happened is that everybody focused on attacking her and telling her why she was wrong and didn't focus on the real point is why do we have these games this way? Why are we not getting these deeper experiences?
Right.
So I mean, she made this great point, but the delivery, totally backfired, I thought.
Well, with that, let's wrap up the show. I think in answering these three questions, these three topics, we have defined the future of this industry. And I believe this podcast will be looked back upon as a turning point in the history of the industry. So, gentlemen, it was a pleasure making history with you tonight.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Indeed.
Always a pleasure, Tim.
Definitely. Thanks.
Well, if I can plug something, I would like to give a shout out to my unborn child who will be brought into the world in about 10 days. So the next time you hear me on this podcast, I will be a father of 3. I happen to know he's already a big fan of the show, at least the parts that I'm on. So
sure. Have you been playing it to the belly?
Yes, I got a special. It's a set of headphones. We wrap it right around the belly, and it's really just constantly kicking.
God,
listens to the show.
I hope he doesn't come out thinking I'm his dad then.
He'll be terribly confused.
I was just thinking you've condemned your kid to a lifetime of wedgies already. But
oh no. He's confused. Who are all these dudes I keep listening to? He'll be confused when he hears a female voice. All right. Well, that'll do it for the podcast. Remember, you can always download the show from the iTunes Music Store or the Zune Marketplace. You can also listen right off the GameCritics.com homepage, where you can leave comments and suggestions about past and future episodes. Gentlemen, Chi, David, Mike, always a pleasure.
Good luck with the impending fatherhood.
Thank you.
Gotta get some sleep.
Absolutely. I'm going to bed right now. And we're putting this podcast to bed. So that'll do it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.